Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. What's the creepiest thing that has ever happened to you that you cannot explain? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Back in high school in the early 2000s, we were all down at a river partying. I drank a bit, so my friend Marky drove my car back to where I was staying. We were on the back roads of our farming area, and I was slightly reclined in the passenger seat. All of a sudden, something hit my windshield. It was like a thick rubber band that was stretched across the road. They kind of rolled up my windshield and over the top of my car. We were like, what the I kept driving. Then a couple of jacked up trucks popped on their lights and came speeding up behind us. She was obviously freaked out, as was I, so I told her to just keep driving toward town. They didn't follow for long. I still have no idea what the hell that was about. I had a premonition last summer about being hit by an oncoming car while driving. I've been driving for over 30 years and never really thought about it before. I left a place, and about a mile down the road, I get distinct thoughts about being hit. Little details about the wheel jamming into my mouth and head. Not more than 2 minutes later, an oncoming car wanders across the center line into my lane. I was ready for it and swerved to avoid it. If I'd been distracted, I would have been hit at highway speeds and certainly dead. I was driving my 1975 classic car. Crazy. I've thought about that a lot since. I was about 7 months pregnant with my second son. I was at home alone when I had the sudden urge to go upstairs to the far bedroom we were using for storage. I started climbing over things, pushing boxes out of the way to get in the closet. When I got to the closet, I turned on the light and even said to myself, okay, why am I in here? I looked to my right, and inside my older son's baby bathtub was a sealed, padded envelope. Inside were a letter and 2 red plastic clips. The letter was from our car seats manufacturer, stating that it was possible that the straps on the seat could come undone from the back in an accident, and the clips would prevent it from happening. This was my older son's seat that we planned to use for the baby. I gave the clips to my husband to put on the belts. He put the clips on and reinstalled the base on our SUV. When my son was 3 months old, we got into a rollover accident. The SUV did a complete revolution before landing back on its wheels. He slept through the whole thing. The firefighters told me that whoever installed that seat did a fantastic job. Those straps would have most likely failed and I would have lost my son. He's 15 now, and to this day, I still can't explain what drew me to that room. I had some creepy experiences, but those are essentially impossible to prove, so that doesn't matter. I think they're real. My parents remember some parts of them, but again, there's nothing I can prove. What I do know is that I don't know who the Rudy was. Going into 8th grade, my sister came home and told me she ran into my friend Rudy. I asked her who Rudy was. She said, your friend. You're always hanging out with him at Chevo. He asked me how you were, and if you were coming back for 8th grade at the same school. And I was so confused because I didn't know anyone named Rudy. Then I went to school and met Rudy. He knew everything about me. He asked me how martial arts were going, etc. And he knew everyone in my friend group. Everyone knew him. He just fit right in. But I didn't know him. I'm known for my memory. I could remember tiny shit from years ago. It's a running gag in my friend group. I didn't remember him. I stayed in that school district for 2 more years. Rudy was always friendly and hung out with me. I tried my best to be nice, but he always creeped me out, and he gave me no reason to dislike him. He was a decent guy. But I didn't know him. He had all sorts of stories, and no one ever called him out on them, but I don't remember any of them. Eventually, I moved away and grew up. And something struck me. He recognized my sister. My sister is 10 years older than me. No one in school except for my best friend and a neighbor I had ages ago knew her. 2 people from my school knew her, and that's it. She wasn't involved with my school life or friend life at all. Most of my friends didn't even know I had a sister. How the hell did he recognize her? So I went to my sister and asked her. She remembered him. I asked her, did you ever meet him before? No. Did you ever see me hang out with him before? No. Then why did you say he was my friend? Why did you say he hung out with me at Chevo. She said, he told me. He came up and introduced himself. He said that he was your friend and hung out with you at Chevo. That you guys played video games all the time. Chev and I played video games at home. It was always just us two. I told her I didn't know him. He just knew me. Scared the fuck out of me. So who was Rudy? If everybody else knew him, but you didn't, could it have been that you didn't remember, or was this like the longest running practical joke ever? Fascinating. I was driving with my 2-year-old kid and my 3-week-old baby in the back seat. We were going to meet my parents, who live 100 kilometers away from us. It takes us an hour to drive. It was spring. We had just changed to summer tires on our car. The road was clear of ice and snow, but I noticed that the temperature dropped while I was driving. It was getting close to freezing. Suddenly, when I was driving, I got a really strong urge that I had to try to brake, just to see how slippery the road might be. So I pushed the brakes, and there was like no friction at all. We just slid along the road. And when the car finally came to a stop, 3 huge moose crossed the road in front of us. I would have had zero chance to avoid a crash unless I had gotten that intrusive thought to test the brakes. Where did that thought come from? I did not see the moose, and I did not see any ice on the road. I just got the feeling and thought of testing the brakes. I woke up at 2 a.m. one morning. This is fairly unusual since I'm a heavy sleeper. I couldn't get back to sleep, so I checked my phone and saw my mom was online. She's not normally awake then, so I sent her a message. Are you awake? She said, just woke up, going back to sleep soon. And I said, yeah, same. Good night. Half an hour later, I received a phone call that my dad had died in the hospital. I later checked the times of the messages I sent to Mom against his time of death, and it's almost banging on. It's like he was saying goodbye to us in the hospital, and we somehow picked up on it even though we weren't there. I'm normally skeptical of this kind of shit, but it helped me cope with the death for a bit. A while back, I was taking a Greyhound bus home for Thanksgiving after suffering from depression in university. I was having a rough go, so I kept to myself on the bus. I've taken the bus before and am familiar with the stops. However, this time the bus decided to pick up a passenger at a non-stop, middle of nowhere on the highway, who sat in the only seat available beside me. She looked at me almost immediately after the bus started to move again and said, "Everything will be okay." I'm not currently religious, raised united, but she asked me if I wanted to pray, and before I had a chance, she began to pray out loud on the bus. Not long and not loud enough to be obnoxious, but loud enough for everybody to hear. She prayed solely for me and my well-being. I felt immediately relaxed and almost like I'd come up from underwater, where I'd felt I'd been for months. About a minute after she prayed, the bus pulled over, and she got up and got off. The total time on the bus for her was about 7 to 10 minutes. Again, the bus stopped at a place where it had never stopped in the past. I never saw her again, and no one on the bus spoke about it, even seemed to notice her. I arrived home for the weekend, and maybe it was a mix of family and the experience, but my depression lifted, and I have had control over it ever since. My parents, who were more churchgoers than I believe, were guardians. I still don't know what to think of it, but when I think about it, I feel that relaxed feeling again, which is very peaceful. This sounds so incredibly fake, but I swear it happened. I grew up in a very rural area in a tiny town of less than 30 people, all living in a handful of very older Victorian homes, spread across maybe 3 or 4 streets that were all configured in a big circle sort of layout with an old late 19th century hotel in the center. This little town was the remnant of a long-forgotten stagecoach stop between 2 slightly larger but still very small rural towns. Our house was at the very edge of town. Everything else around us was a thick forest that would open up onto this prairie. Our house was backed up against the forest, and my brothers and I used to play in it as kids because there were nothing else to do and no other kids in town. Shortly after we first moved there, We were wandering around in the woods behind our house, and we found this old brick cobblestone path that was partially buried by the undergrowth. We decided to follow it, and it led deeper into the woods, maybe a quarter mile or so down the road. There was a smaller brick path branching off this old road and leading up to a smallish white Victorian cottage-style house. On both sides of the path up to the house, there were these odd flower gardens that mostly seemed to comprise of big leafy shade plants, like ferns and things, and they were fenced in by an older style wooden fence. There was an old woman in the garden. Her hair was long and white and pinned up in a bun style. She was wearing a dark colored dress with bright shiny brooch pinned to the neck, and as I saw it in a bun style. She was wearing a dark colored dress with big shiny brooch pinned to the neck, and as we passed by the house, she smiled at us and waved. We waved back and smiled. The entire population of the town was old folks. They were all very friendly and pleased to see them around kids for the first time, I imagine, in many years. So this was a normal reaction to seeing us. We kept wandering and followed the road until it was fully buried, and then we turned back. On our way back, we passed the house again, and the woman had apparently gone inside because she wasn't out in the garden anymore, and there seemed to be a light coming from the house. We thought nothing else of it and went home. A few days later, our dad had a day off and asked if we wanted to take a walk with him. We said yes, and asked him if he wanted to see this neat road we found and meet our neighbor lady who lived on the road behind our house. He said yes, and we took him into the woods, following the exact same section of road, came upon to the exact same house with the same setting, overgrowth, leafy gardens. We stopped in front of the house, and he looked confused. He walked us into a garden and up to his house, and now that we were actually stopping to look at it and were closer to it, it was very clearly abandoned and had been for likely decades. The brick of the walkway had grass growing up through it and in itself in spots. The paint was peeling off the house, and the wood underneath was green with rot and mildew. My dad hopped up on the porch and told us to stay off of it because it was about to collapse. But he peeked in the window, and they were coated so thick with dust he could barely see in. But the house was again very much abandoned on the inside. There was absolutely no chance the light had been on just days before. He shuffled us back down the path and told us to not go around the house in the future because it wasn't safe and was about to fall on itself. And there was absolutely no way there was an old woman living there. We never mentioned it again, nor did our dad. And we generally tend to avoid the abandoned house in the future because it just felt really eerie after that. When we'd occasionally go that way in the woods again, it would just be there, rotting away even further. I have thought I dreamt this because, again, it sounds fake as hell, but my brothers and I were reminiscing about our childhood home one day. I have young kids of my own now, and we were comparing how strange it was that in the 90s, our dad just let us free roam the wilderness, and now I won't let my kids out in a fenced-in yard without an adult present. One of my brothers brought up the time we'd followed the old man, the brick road, out into the woods and saw that old lady. And then, the next time we went out of the bathhouse, it was abandoned and rotting, with no old woman living there. He asked if anyone else remembered that or if he'd made it up, and we all remembered it exactly, down to heavy in every last detail of the garden, and convinced ourselves that it wasn't real. Yeah, I guess so, but we all remember creeping and remembering exactly the same, and then never spoke about it again until 20 plus years later.